My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today is going to be my fourth installment about how the misuse of technology and screen time is killing our children. So there's going to be multiple parts to this show. I'm not really sure if I'm going to have to cut this show in half or not, because I have a lot of information. So I might have to make this a two-part show. So the first part I want to talk about is some of the feedback that I've been getting from my previous shows. And I think it's important to talk about that. One feedback that I got is that you don't want to come across as the old, angry, bitter, get off my lawn kind of guy. So I'm going to address that. The other part I want to address is screen time a cause of the problems we're seeing in society, more specifically with children today? Or is it just correlated to that? So I want to address those two topics. And I also want to include today, I want to dig down a little bit deeper into the description of the problem. And in the third part of the show, I want to get to a solution. So I want to prescribe a solution to the problem. So let's take it right from the top. Number one, you don't want to sound like the angry old bitter get off my lawn person. And I can understand that. I think feedback like that is extremely fair, and I think it's very helpful, because I think it's what a lot of people think when there's two things that come into play. Number one, you are older than the normal crowd that's speaking. And what happens is, if you have a current trend that's moving, and in this situation, we have technology. It's a trend that's getting bigger by the day, and it's not going to go away. So the thought to complain about it does make you sound like you're the old guy that needs to get out of the way and wait for the trend just to keep moving in the direction it's going. So I can completely understand that. No doubt about it. The other part to that is just the term planned obsolescence. Now, when you have a capitalistic society, it's built on that we have to have a new product all the time. When something hits its peak, it's really on its way out, because we're looking for another product to sell to the masses. And planned obsolescence is not just with products, it's with people. So yes, there are people who are objectively better. They do have more experience, they do have more wisdom, they are more talented. But nobody cares, because the money where it's at is in a younger generation, and they're the ones who spend most of the money. So you have to move along what they think. Just as a thought, I mean, this happens in art and music as well. Like, you can look at somebody like Elvis Presley, you can hear him, and whether it's, I know it's opinion, but you can objectively say that Elvis Presley had a voice that's better than 99% of the people, let's say, that you're going to see on The Masked Singer or American Idol. But does it matter? They're not going to push his records, and a record company is not going to do that. What they're going to do is they're going to push young people who, whether they're good or not, they're going to try to move them into this thing so people can make millions of dollars. That's just the way it is. Planned obsolescence. You just have to understand that. But here's the problem. There's extreme difficulty. There always was. But now it's even more difficult for professionals to be heard. It's more difficult now because of social media that professionals are trying sometimes to go against cultural trends. And they're going to have a really hard time of it, much more difficult now than we've ever had in the past. And in this case, we're talking about technology. So the professionals here, I would say the people from Silicon Valley, they're professionals. Psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists. We're all saying the same thing. We're all being salmon, going upstream, but yet society, because of money, is moving the other direction, and nobody cares. They're going to call you the old angry guy. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge all of this. So here's the first part. What do you do as a professional when there's a massive preponderance of evidence that indicates highly an objective and obvious truth, but yet it goes against cultural norms and trends. I would say is that you have to speak truth to power. You got to stand up. You got to say it anyway. Because in the end, you could be on the correct side of history, and I think that means something. Another question, who has the power in this world? Who has the power in the United States, in a capitalistic country? Well, we could say it's big corporations, right? They coerce and they manipulate people with their money, and they can move hearts and minds without people actually knowing it. But that's more of a political answer, so I'm going to stay away from that for today. Here's my real answer. Who has the power? It's the majority of people. They have the power, no matter if it's good or bad. It's the majority. Unfortunately, the majority of people tends to be ignorant. They tend to be superficial, and they live life impulse to impulse throughout their whole life without any real depth to their thought. I mean, to shorten all that up, you could say the masses are asses. That's the way it is, but we don't care. So you kind of have to sometimes go along with the trend. And this is getting worse by the day. There's a great book out there by Tom Nichols. It's called The Death of Expertise. And in it, he talks about many things, but one of the things he talks about is the many forces that are undermining the authority of experts these days. He talks about social media and how it's encouraging narcissism. It encourages people to have overconfidence in their abilities. And it encourages the rise of anti-expertise and anti-intellectualism. So people these days, they're extraordinarily proud of not knowing anything. And yet they make believe that they do, and they have an extreme distrust of people in authority or who actually know something. So in this sense, going back to technology and screen time for kids, I hear this all the time. I hear parents going, "What do you know? I researched this." It's like, what are you talking about? Like, okay, so you know more than all the therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and all the people who invented this technology in Silicon Valley. And we get that over and over and over again. Just as a quick aside, I've worked with this a few times and it hit me again in the last week. I'm working with a 5-year-old, and once again, I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm working with a 5-year-old. He's afraid to fall down. What? It's because he doesn't play. He doesn't do sports. He's afraid to run. I mean, at 5 years old, he's been watching a screen and not having any parental influence on him, no social connection, no real friends. At 5 years old, you should want to be running, jumping, climbing trees, falling, being broken, bloody, skinning your knees. Like, this is normal. It used to be normal. Now I'm seeing kids that are afraid to fall. They're afraid to get hurt at 5? That's amazing. How are you ever going to learn how to ride a bicycle? This isn't normal. This is a kid who's been sitting in front of a screen and watches life go by. It's like, oh my God, I might get a broken leg if I fall. So he walks like this even. I'm like, this is so sad. Anyway, let's move on from that. That's just a quick anecdotal piece of evidence I have that really bothers me. Here's a question. Are you automatically the old, angry, bitter, get off my lawn person just because you fight a current trend? Or is it literal or figurative? In other words, in our country, we love youth and we put older people out to pasture. So right away, the argument's going to be, you're old, you need to get out. But technically, you don't have to be old. All it is that you're going against a trend. I'm going to give you an example of this. Back in 1990, I was 25 years old. And at that time, I had a Bachelor of Science degree in exercise physiology. I had competed in many bodybuilding shows already, and I've won a fair amount. Twice, I competed and placed in the United States Natural Championships. So I had education and I had experience. And I was a personal trainer at 25 years old. And just like every other personal trainer at that time, we were trying to make people happy and healthy. And we were doing this by getting people to like exercise, to enjoy exercise, to stop being sedentary, to make sure that the trends of eating processed food, this type of thing, that you really need to get back to basics and eat lean meats, fruits, and vegetables. That was 1990. It's like 32 years ago. How did I do? And how did every other personal trainer do? Well, I could tell you. In the year 2020, we have, well, let me cut back a little bit. In 1990, at that time, about 10% of the general public, 10 to 11%, were obese, and about 20% or so were overweight. Cut 30 years later, 76% of men are overweight or obese, and 67% of women are obese or overweight. Obviously, that's a destructive number that every personal trainer failed miserably in that sense. The cultural trend still went the way it was. And diabetes is up and all these other health issues, no matter what any personal trainer tried to do. And here I sit again, looking at a trend, and this time it's in technology. 30 years from now, it's going to be way worse than it is now. And so again, should you be the person that sounds like the get off my lawn guy? And I would say the answer is yes. As a quick aside to this, it's interesting about men, right? So if we look at the numbers, men tend to be more overweight and obese than women by about 8% in this country right now, which is insane. Men have more testosterone than women, obviously, which makes it easier for them to gain muscle and to lose body fat. Knowing that, and men are the ones who are out of shape, it just points to the fact of how passive men are getting and how unwilling they are to take an active role in their lives. But that's for another show, but I think that's an interesting thing to mention as well. The other part that I want to talk about that was brought up to me, which again, I think it's fair feedback and I think it's very helpful, so it needs to be looked at, is excessive screen time with children, is it correlated or is it a causation of the negative symptoms we're seeing in children today? Again, we're going to go into these negative symptoms a little bit more later, but I have already talked about this at length in other shows. So let's just say that there is plenty of negative symptoms that we're seeing in children. But is it correlated or is there a causation to screen time? There's an easy way to figure this out. It's really simple, and they've already done some studies on this. Here's the result. All of the negative symptoms that we see in these children are diminished or eliminated with the elimination or diminishing of screen time. There's your answer. We can say 100% that excessive screen time is causing the negative symptoms in children. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not other things that are also causing it, such as bad parenting, but that's another issue. There are other things that are causing these symptoms that we're seeing in children, but there's no doubt that excessive technology is a cause. It's not just correlated. It's easily provable. So of course, with parenting the way it is these days, Knowing that, I still get parents that say, is there any way around it? I'm so busy. I need to use screen time with my kids. Like, what's an appropriate amount of time that I can still have my kids on screens? And I think about that and I go, besides the fact that they're playing with fire here, I have a better question than that. How much poison is okay for a child to ingest? Obviously the answer is none, right? It's the same thing with this technology and screen time and using screens as a babysitter. The answer is none, especially when we're talking about the year from birth to 6 years old, where their personality is basically fully formed by that time. So their personalities are pretty much fully formed by the time that they're in first grade. And yet, parents don't want to understand this. There are a whole bunch of things that parents can do with kids other than screen time. But I think I'm going to get to that. We're 16 minutes in already. I think I'm going to cut this into 2 different parts. But let me finish this part, because we're talking about parenting here. And one of the things when I say that there's a ton of other things that you can do with your kids as part of the prescription here, because I don't want to just talk about the problem all the time, I'll hear the same things. But Joe, I'm so busy, you have no idea. Like, I'm just so busy with all these things. And I'll say, well, what are you busy with, really? You know, it's like, well, you know, because my mother had 2 jobs, and yet she was present for me and my sister all the time. I never felt neglected. So why is my mother or someone like my mother such a better parent than what I'm seeing today on a regular basis? I don't know the answer to that totally. But here's one of the things I would talk about. Somebody would say to me, but I have to do laundry. It takes a long time. I have to wash clothes. Like, do you? Like, do you take a bunch of clothes and walk it down to the river and beat your clothes against rocks? Do you do that? I don't know anybody who does that. And then when the clothes are all wet, then you have to lay them out on the ground or on rocks or put them on a clothesline, and you got to pray that the weather is hot enough that those clothes get dry in a few days. Is that what's going on that takes so long? No, we have modern conveniences. We have something called a washing machine, and in it you take a bunch of clothes, throw it in a washing machine, touch a button. The machine washes the clothes, you don't, you press a button. And in like an hour, the clothes are washed. Wow, even your kids can do that. And your kids can do chores. And then they can feel important, like they're a part of the family. They can do that. That doesn't take up any extra time. Drying your clothes, take the clothes, dump them in that other machine that's next to the washing machine, hit another button, come back an hour later, clothes are dry. But then I'm going to hear, oh my God, but I have to fold them, and that takes forever. You don't think kids are capable of folding their own clothes and developing some self-esteem and to be able to put clothes in a drawer and go, wow, like here are my pants and here's my shirts and socks. And then I could line them up in color order or whatever they want to do. What are you talking about? You don't have time. It doesn't make any sense. Like, I remember back in the day too, like we would have to go to a laundromat. You go to a laundromat, you might be there for a whole day. You know, you might be there for 2 days because you can't find a dryer, and then all of a sudden your clothes are musty and you got to start over again. You know, then you got to find more quarters. Like it was so much harder way back then. You know, people go, well, I have to make dinner. Do you? Because most people that I know do not have dinners together as families anymore. We threw that out too. And if you do have dinners together, excellent, that's a great idea, you should do it. But how many people are churning their own butter these days? Like, that doesn't take time. You're not doing that. You go and you're gonna go buy butter. I'm not telling you should buy butter, by the way. But people do, and they just go to the store, and it's not a big deal. How many people are making food from scratch? I don't know. My grandmother did that. Like, people don't really do that anymore. Some people do, but most people don't. Most people are getting processed garbage that I told you 30 years ago that you shouldn't do, but you did it anyway, and now everybody's overweight. But that's a whole nother story. But again, we also have microwaves. You press a button, and in like a minute or two, it's done. So what is it with everybody saying how much they don't have any time for anything? There's modern conveniences everywhere. Everywhere. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it at all that people don't have time. So we're 20 minutes in, and I've got a ton more things to do. I want to describe the problem in a little bit more detail, and I want to prescribe a solution if I can. And so I think I'm going to end the show right there. So let's just go with that. I hope that was valuable, and I'm going to immediately record the next show. So hopefully you watch both of these. I hope you find it valuable so far. And hopefully, if you've seen enough of the evidence that I've shown you, you might want to ask yourself, if you're still going against the evidence, ask yourself why. Are you being moved by the culture? Are you being moved by your own laziness? Because if you are actually looking at reality, your choice and your decisions would be much, much easier. I hope this has been valuable. My name is Joe Prony. This is the Rise Above Project. Please subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you.